next guest is Scott Ritter. He always makes the most important of any and all of our guests, the most important contribution, precisely because he's been there and done that, precisely because he was a Marine Corps intelligence officer, precisely because he was in the arms inspection business, precisely because he was involved in some of the most highly charged geopolitical areas in the world then, in the former Soviet Union, in the post-Saddam Hussein Iraq. He and I were comrades in arms. We both said that the case that had been made for what turned out to be the utter destruction of Iraq and the killing of 1 million of its people and the cascading of fanatic extremism around the world, we both said that this was one of the biggest blunders, one of the biggest crimes of the early 21st century. Little did we know that 25 years nearly on, we'd still having to be talking with each other, almost weekly really, about even bigger blunders, even bigger crimes. But that we must. Scott Ritter, is always a pleasure, Scott, to have you on the show. I'm very grateful for your time. There's so many enchiladas we could choose, but let's start with, if you will, the NATO proxy war against Russia. I was saying to Afshan Ratansi earlier, I don't think Donald Trump's 50-day ultimatum is going to alter the course of Vladimir Putin's presidency much, but I'm beginning to suspect that it's going to alter little Volodymyr Zelensky's. What do you think?
I agree. You know, when he first announced it, I was scratching my head as to why 50 days? I mean, it's a arbitrary number. I don't know if my screen's frozen or not, but I'll keep speaking just in case you can hear me.
Yeah. Your voice is good.
It's an arbitrary number. Okay. It's an arbitrary number, 50 days. It's not linked to anything of significance. And when you put it in the context of the other things that he announced in the context of this, arms deliveries that just aren't happening. I mean, people need to understand the 17 batteries, a full complement, according to the president, they're not flowing. The Swiss found out that the Patriots they ordered that were supposed to arrive in 2026, 2027 aren't arriving. Instead, that production line is being diverted to Germany that then will divert Patriots to Ukraine. But that doesn't change the fact that these systems don't get delivered until 2026, 2027. It's currently 2025. And even though I'm a simple Marine and math isn't my forte, I know that 2026 is a year away. So the weapons deliveries are just a sham, just a pure sham. The sanctions aren't going to happen. I mean, this notion that the president is somehow going to drive fear into the hearts of the Chinese, the Indians, and the Brazilians by threatening sanctions. Brazil already said, if you don't want to trade with us, we won't trade with you. It doesn't matter. China's already said we're doubling down on Russia. And, do you want us to once again pull the plug on rare earth minerals and magnetic materials that will collapse your auto industry? Trump won't do that. And India, if you keep pushing India enough, they are going to slide off the fence on the side that America doesn't want them to slide on, which is BRICS, G20, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So 50 days to do what? Seymour Hersh, a close friend of mine and a man who I deeply respect in terms of his journalism, has come out and said it's to get rid of Volodymyr Zelensky. And this is the only thing that makes sense. The United States understands that Russia and Ukraine are on totally opposite poles here when it comes to sides of the equation, and you can't bring them together. You're not going to bomb Vladimir Putin into submission. I mean, the ridiculous campaign statement that Trump made in 2024 that he told Putin to his face that if you go into Kiev, I will bomb the bovine excrement out of Moscow is a straight up lie. That conversation never took place, nor did the conversation with Xi Jinping. But the bottom line is Putin will not budge, and Trump knows this. The problem is Zelensky, and Zelensky has to go. And there's widespread recognition of this reality. And I think Seymour Hersh's reporting, together with other reporting that's appeared in the British press, strongly suggests that Zelensky's on his way out. And this is the only way you move this issue forward. You remove Zelensky. You have to have elections in Ukraine. There has to be a legitimate leader that then can negotiate a deal that will be acceptable to the Russians. I mean, that's the other bottom line is whoever replaces Zelensky has to know that this is a new game and there are new rules. The old rules, the old game no longer apply. But I think that's what these 50 days are for. I think Zelensky's on his way out. And again, I don't mean to be too harsh here, but he can either leave the old-fashioned way, which is on an airplane with a suitcase full of money going to one of the many mansions that he's bought with American taxpayer funds over the course of the past decade, or he can die on a cold slab, shirtless, with a bullet hole in his head. That's just the way it's going to be. There's no happy ending for Zelensky here.
There needs to be more than one suitcase, I think, unless he's got most of it out already. I'm recalling our former puppet in Afghanistan. I've already forgotten his name, but I will never forget the black bin bags brim full of paper currency. So very last decade, isn't it? But the coordination of the I don't know if you've read Robert Louis Stevenson, Treasure Island. The black spot was pressed into the palm. This was a black spot moment. The Spectator and the Financial Times, who don't do anything, never say anything that is not approved by the state and the deep state, they handed Zelensky the black spot this weekend. They said that, guess what, he's an authoritarian. What you and I were accused of being Putin apologists for repeatedly pointing out, they said he's corrupt. Ditto, that he is deeply unpopular. Ditto. Everything we said is now appearing in the world's fanciest newspapers. How does that feel to you?
Well, it won't be the first time this has happened. I would hope it would be the last time, but unfortunately, I have a tendency to call things correctly before the mainstream media catches on, and it usually means that bad policies have ensued that aren't fact-driven. But Zelensky, I did a documentary on him, a two-part documentary back in 2023 called Agent Zelensky, where I detailed the fact that this man isn't a democratically chosen savior of the Ukrainian people, but a hand-picked puppet of MI6, the CIA, Ukrainian oligarchs, whose sole job was to do what happened, to get Ukraine to serve as a proxy to the West in a conflict with Russia designed to strategically defeat Russia. And in this way, you can say Zelensky has been a great success in terms of facilitating at least 3 years of this effort. But the fact is, the Russian bear isn't going to roll over and play dead. The Russian bear came out of hibernation and has been eating very well, apparently, and it's a very strong bear right now, and it's on the prowl. And nobody's going to be able to put it back into its den. And so Zelensky's time is up. They now have to bring in another figurehead whose job is to facilitate the surrender of Ukraine. And that's what we're talking about here, literally the surrender of Ukraine. This will not be a negotiated settlement. And the West is starting to come to grips with that. You see the panic in NATO right now as they realize that Russia has won this war. And it's not going to end well for NATO in terms of their ambitious endeavor to keep Russia down. The good news is all the ridiculous talk you hear out of the British generals and the Polish generals and the French generals, even now American generals, about Russia wanting to invade NATO. That's just ludicrous. It's stupid. It's ignorant as the day is long. But they need to be saying this and screaming this as people look at Ukraine and say, hey, we're losing. And they can't say, well, it's just a fake the whole time. It's just a proxy war. Don't worry about it. They now have to say, in order to preserve their political credibility, yes, those evil Russians are winning there, so now we need to build up our arsenals to be able to confront the Russians. I've never seen so much bellicose posturing by British officers in a long time. I mean, it's up there with the ridiculous posturing of the German officers and the Polish officers, three armies that simply can't fight today, especially the British Army, who, I mean, can barely fill up a soccer stadium with troops. And apparently, based upon what I've seen, no offense, George, but many of these troops are not battle fit. And yet the generals are out there just talking as if they're ready to go to war with Russia. It's not only embarrassing, but it's dangerous.
It is dangerous and slightly absurd, slightly Gilbert and Sullivan. It is a paper army. We have 74,000 in all three armed forces, by the way. But that includes hairdressers and clerks and medical staffs and probably diversity officers and all the rest of that paraphernalia. We probably couldn't field more than 40,000 people across three services that would be ready for action in a war against Russia with millions of men and 3 years battle hardened and with a military industrial complex that knocks everybody else together. Military industrial complex working like clockwork. No doubt the 40,000 that we have are skilled and brave officers and men. I'm not in any way seeking to disparage them, but they are being encouraged by their political masters to get into, a swinging dick contest with people with much, much larger dicks than them. And that's what's dangerous about it.
I'm sorry, George, that's just perfect. But yeah, I mean, this is basically, the beta cook showing up at the porn star convention thinking they got what it takes. They don't. It's ridiculous. Just to show you the level of ridiculous. No, drone warfare is being redefined as we speak in the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. The Russians now, they allowed an Italian journalist to go through their production facility in Tatarstan and outside of Kazan, where they're in the process of producing over 1,000 of these Shahed-style drones a day, 1,000 a day. They're already firing 400, 500, 600, 700 a day. There's talk that they're going to get it up to 2,000 a day. This is Russia in full swing. And when I say in full swing, understand that they're not really in full swing because the Russian economy is still very much dominated by civilian industry. The military has been mobilized to a certain extent, but this is not a wartime footing. But in this, mobilized state, they're outproducing the West in 3 months what the entire NATO produces in a year. Pete Hegseth, the U.S. Secretary of Defense, has come out with this ridiculous directive for drone dominance. He's directing that the United States will have drone dominance as if by saying this, it shall happen. And at the same time, the United States has unveiled its copy, literally a copy of the Shahed drone, the geranium that the Russians are mass producing, called Lucas. It's got one of those ridiculous American acronyms. But he's saying this proves that we're on par with the Russians. Lucas is still in the developmental stage. It hasn't achieved mass production. It never will achieve anything remotely resembling this because the Russians are producing something that costs $20,000 each. Lucas is going to cost close to $1 million, $1.5 million per copy. This shows you why we will never match the Russians because we can't do what the Russians do. And we're not even talking about the manpower right now. I've said this before and I'll say it again. Are the Russians supermen? Absolutely not. They bleed just like we do. When bullets hit them, they die, they get wounded, they cry out for mommy. They do the whole thing. War is as hell. But what the Russians have on us is that for 3 years they've learned how to kill. There's a great book written by a trilogy. Rick Atkinson wrote it about the U.S. Army in World War II. And when he gets to the end of the first book, An Army at Dawn, and he talks about getting ready to go into Sicily, he said the soldiers that were green at Kasserine Pass that the Germans beat, he said they had learned that the only way they're going to go home is through Berlin. And the only way they're going to get to Berlin is by killing Germans. And they became very good at killing Germans. The Russians right now are very good at killing Ukrainians, and they'll be very good at killing anybody who gets in front of them. NATO has no relevant combat experience. And the first engagement between Russian forces and NATO forces, if God forbid it ever happens, will end in an absolute disaster for the NATO forces, which is why people like General Christopher Donahue, the current commander of European forces, who just hosted in Wiesbaden a conference called, I think it's Euroland. It's about the future of war. He threatened to take out the Kaliningrad exclave. He said, we can do this instantly. No, Chris, you can't. If you even attack Kaliningrad, understand it doesn't exist in isolation. There's the rest of Russia out there with all of their missiles, like the Oreshnik. You will die screaming like a scared girl in your bunker when you realize the missiles are incoming and you have no air defense to protect you, and you made a grave mistake. Anybody who thinks that they could fight and defeat the Russians on the field of battle today is making a grave mistake. But moreover, we should never even be thinking about that. The Russians are not posturing themselves for war. They are posturing themselves for peace, to live in prosperity. Go to Russia, visit Russia. I know you were in Russia recently, and I know you know what I'm about to say is true. These are people who are in love with living life, and they're living a good, high-quality life. And all they ask is to be able to continue to live that life free of the interference of outside powers who have, for the past century and a half, wanted nothing more than to bring Russia down.
Amen to all that. Speaking of Russia, Scott, it turns out, although again you and I already knew this, but now the whole country knows it, that Russia was indeed a hoax. And moreover, it is a hoax that is entirely the responsibility of your former President Barack Obama, because it wasn't the intelligence community that said that Putin put Trump into the White House. In fact, they said the precise opposite. It was Obama and his henchmen and women who perpetrated a fraud, I say a coup against the idea of America, against the American Republic itself, exponentially bigger than January 6th, that farcical affair. The consequences of that could have been World War III, because if Russia had indeed interfered in your politics to the extent that they installed an agent of theirs in the White House, well, could scarcely get more serious than that. Do you think this has got legs? Is there any chance of prosecution?
The information that Tulsi Gabbard has brought forward is damning. I don't know if it's sufficient for an indictment, and I don't know if it's sufficient for a successful prosecution. On the surface, it should lead to, preparation for an indictment. But you have to also be careful of the fact that prosecution may be difficult because you have to prove things. And for instance, I think one of the most difficult hurdles they're going to have to overcome is what Brennan, the CIA director, did in bringing out a human source, a defector inside Russia, inside the presidential administration, who apparently was a double agent, and that the Russians were feeding information back just to play the United States and humiliate the United States, which they've succeeded in doing, by the way. Again, this is totally a self-inflicted wound. But I don't know if when you go to trial, this kind of information may not be able to be brought forward, because then you get into all the things the CIA never wants to talk about, and then other evidence that would be condemning will be protected by executive privilege and things like that. So I think Tulsi's playing a strong hand up front to create the public, to shape public perception about the criminal actions of Obama and his henchmen. But if it comes time to actually successfully prosecute, which I dream about, because I truly believe that no person is above the law, especially a president who betrays the trust and confidence of the American people by committing a legitimate act of treason, which is what Obama has done. I'd love to see them held accountable. But, we're talking about three of the most, high-placed deep state actors possible: Obama, Brennan, Comey, CIA, FBI, and the president. And it's going to be very hard to put forward a cognizable case that can actually succeed in prosecuting because of the classification of the information that is at stake here.
The public now know, though, that the entire first presidential term of Donald Trump was deliberately wrecked, imperiling the peace of the world, and that the British were up to their necks in it. We're not called perfidious Albion for nothing. The role of MI6 in all of these stories that we've discussed tonight, and others that we've discussed on other occasions, it seems to me we're to paraphrase Oscar Wilde, we're two countries united by a common deep state.
Yeah, George, this breaks my heart because, as you know, when I was United Nations weapons inspector, I worked very closely with the British government. There were periods of time where I would make weekly flights to London, the red eye, to just fly in the morning, have meetings in Whitehall, have meetings throughout London, and then fly home at night to be back in time to file paperwork at the end of the business day. Every time I went to Iraq, I traveled through London, and every time I returned from Iraq, I traveled through London because I had a close, intimate relationship with the British government, with the British intelligence community, and I had deep respect for the professionals that I worked with. But that England no longer exists. And in the England that I believed in was you, George. You hosted me in Parliament. You showed me Parliament. You walked side by side with me, in a million-man march that went to Hyde Park where we spoke out against the war. You showed me that the British people are capable of having a heart and doing the right thing. And that's the England, the United Kingdom, the Great Britain that I fell in love with, but it no longer exists. I'm not saying you don't exist. Clearly you do. But your government is not the friend of the United States, not by any stretch of the imagination. And we're at a point right now in American-British relations where we need to be calling a spade a spade. You are not our friend. In fact, you are our enemy. You facilitated active treason against the sitting president of the United States. Under some circumstances, that would be a casus belli, which means we have every right to blow you off the face of the earth. And you're lucky I'm not the president, because I'll tell you what, you interfere with American democracy to that degree, you will pay a heavy price. As you should. Not you, George. You're my friend, and not the British people, and that's why we'll never do this. But your government is the absolute enemy of not just the United States, but all of humanity. The thing it's a shame to say, because you're the birthplace of the Magna Carta. You're the birthplace of some of the greatest intellectual minds about democracy and human rights. And what you've become, what your nation has become under its current leadership, is an embarrassment not just to England, but to all of mankind.